I never thought I would see the day when my own son would look me in the eyes and call me a burden. People always imagine betrayal arriving like thunder. Loud, violent, impossible to miss. But in my case it came softly, wrapped in politeness and paperwork. It started on an ordinary Sunday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table, stirring my tea, watching dust dance in the sunlight. Daniel came in wearing that tailored gray suit that always made him look more like a stranger than the boy I raised. He didn't sit. He just stood there, hands in pockets, eyes everywhere but on me. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk about what's best for you." Those words still echo in my head. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. He talked about safety and comfort, about professional care and community living. Every word sounded kind, but his tone was practiced, the way people speak when they've already made up their minds. I listened quietly, hands trembling around my teacup. "You're saying you want me in a nursing home?" He sighed, glancing toward the hallway where Lydia, his wife, hovered, pretending to look at family photos. "It's not like that, Mom. You'll have company activities and good meals. You won't have to worry about the stairs anymore." I stared at him, remembering the nights I worked double shifts as a teacher to pay for his college. The time I sold my wedding ring to fix his car so he could get to his first job interview. Now the same boy stood there explaining how strangers would take care of me better than family could. "I'm fine here," I said. "I've lived in this house for 40 years. Mom, it's not up for debate," Lydia added gently, her voice dripping sympathy but her eyes hard. "Daniel's only thinking of what's best." What's best? Those words cut deeper than any insult. Within a week the papers were signed. They said it was temporary, just until they found something suitable. I wanted to believe them. The day I left my home, I paused at the door and looked back one last time. The walls still smelled of cinnamon and chalk dust. The scent of every holiday. Every student project. Every sleepless night grading essays. I whispered goodbye under my breath, though no one heard it. The nursing home, Ridgeview Haven, stood on the outskirts of town, where the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and loneliness. The lobby gleamed with fake marble floors, a fish tank bubbling beside a row of wheelchairs. The receptionist smiled like she'd been trained to do it 1,000 times. "Welcome, Mrs. Hayes," she said. "We'll take good care of you." The word care lost all meaning that day. My room was small. Beige walls, a single bed pressed against the window. My roommate Eleanor was a soft-spoken woman with snow-white hair and a laugh that sounded like paper rustling. She looked up from her knitting and said, "New arrival? Don't worry, dear. The days are long but the nights are peaceful, if you don't listen too closely." "What do you mean?" I asked. "You'll hear them crying sometimes," she whispered, eyes drifting toward the hallway. "People are missing home. You get used to it." I didn't get used to it. The first night, I lay awake listening to the building breathe, footsteps in the corridor, doors closing softly, the faint hum of machines. I thought about Daniel's face when he handed me over, the relief in his eyes when the staff took my suitcase. That look haunts me more than anything else. Days turned into routines. Breakfast at 7. Pills at 8. Physical therapy on Tuesdays. Smiles painted over fatigue. I watched people forget their names, their families, their reasons for staying alive. I swore I wouldn't become one of them. She had been a librarian before her arthritis turned her hands stiff. We traded stories like old coins, shiny in some places, worn in others. She told me about her daughter, who visited once a year. I told her about Daniel and my granddaughter Emily, a bright little girl with eyes full of wonder and a laugh that could soften any heart. "Does she visit?" Eleanor asked. "She used to," I said quietly. "But Lydia says school keeps her busy." In truth, I hadn't seen Emily in months. The thought of her growing up thinking of me as a stranger hurt more than anything else. One evening as the sun bled orange through the blinds, I received a visitor. It wasn't Daniel. It was a man in a dark suit carrying a clipboard. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I'm from the financial department. There have been some changes regarding your accounts." I frowned. "My accounts?" "Yes, ma'am. Your son Daniel has the power of attorney now. All billing and property matters will go through him." The room spun. "That can't be right. I never signed anything." He smiled politely, showing perfect teeth. "You did, ma'am. Right here." He slid a photocopy across the table. My signature stared back at me, shaky, but unmistakable. I felt cold all over. I had never signed that paper. After he left, I sat in silence. Eleanor watched me carefully. You all right? I couldn't speak. My hands shook as I folded the paper, tucking it under my pillow like evidence of a crime. That night, I barely slept. Every memory of Daniel as a boy, his scraped knees, his graduation, the day he called me the best mom in the world, collided with this new reality. By morning, something inside me had hardened. I began to take notes, dates, names, every visitor who came and went. Eleanor called it teacher habits. I called it preparation. If my own son thought he could silence me, he'd forgotten who raised him. 2 weeks later, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from Emily. The envelope was pink, covered in glittery stickers. My heart almost stopped. Dear Grandma, it read. Daddy said you live with friends now. I drew you, me, Daddy, and Mommy having ice cream. I miss you. Mommy says you're resting so you can play with me soon. I love you. The paper smelled faintly of crayons. I pressed it to my chest and cried for the first time in years. Eleanor said softly, You're lucky, some of us don't get even that. Lucky. That word sounded bitter. That evening I made a decision. If Daniel wanted me out of his way, he would learn what a real burden looked like. Not the frail, polite mother he left behind, but the woman who once managed 30 unruly students every day, and balanced 3 jobs to keep him fed. I started small. I charmed the staff, asked questions, and remembered details. I learned that Ridgeview Haven was funded by a corporate chain with spotless brochures and a few dark secrets buried under paperwork. I'd always believed knowledge was power. I was about to prove it again. One morning, during breakfast, a nurse mentioned a charity inspection coming up, something about state funding and compliance. They'll clean everything top to bottom, she said, rolling her eyes. Even the things we're not supposed to touch. That was when the plan began forming in my mind. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable. I woke the next morning before dawn. The halls were quiet except for the soft squeak of a janitor's cart, and the low hum of fluorescent lights. Ridgeview Haven felt like a different place before sunrise. Empty, fragile, vulnerable. I made my tea with the small kettle Eleanor had smuggled from her daughter years ago, and while I waited for the water to boil, I spread my notes across the nightstand. Dates, signatures, overheard conversations, all recorded in neat columns. Teaching had trained me to notice patterns, and what I saw disturbed me. Residents who complained too much were suddenly transferred for health reasons. Staff turnover was constant. Donations came in, but the library remained closed due to budget cuts. Everything pointed to one thing. Someone was bleeding this place dry. By mid-morning I asked to see the director. His name was Mr. Clayton, a heavy-set man with thin hair and an even thinner smile. His office smelled of coffee and disinfectant. When I entered, he gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. What can I do for you, Mrs. Hayes? I clasped my hands neatly in my lap. I wanted to discuss the authorization forms for my finances. There seems to be a mistake. He clicked through something on his computer, pretending to look interested. Ah, yes. Your son handles those now. All perfectly legal. Is there a problem? There is. I said evenly. I never signed over my accounts. The signature you have isn't mine. He offered a slow, patronizing smile. Sometimes memory can play tricks on us as we age. Don't worry, your son's taking excellent care of things. The words landed like stones. He was dismissing me the same way Daniel had. I stood, meeting his gaze head on. My memory is fine, Mr. Clayton. I was a teacher for 40 years. I remember every student who ever tried to lie to me, and you're not nearly as convincing. He blinked, his polite expression cracking for a split second before recovering. Mrs. Hayes, I think you should rest. I left before he could finish. My heart was pounding, but I also felt something I hadn't in months. Purpose. That afternoon I slipped into the administrative wing while the staff changed shifts. Most of the doors were locked, but I found a filing room left ajar. Inside, rows of metal cabinets hummed beneath flickering lights. I scanned labels until I found one marked Resident Authorizations. There it was, my file. I opened it, hands trembling. Inside lay copies of forms I'd never seen before, all neatly stamped and signed. At the bottom of one page was my signature, but the date beside it was from the week I'd been hospitalized after my fall. The same week Daniel had visited daily. He had done it then. I stared at the papers until my vision blurred. Then I quietly folded one page into my sleeve and slipped out unnoticed. Eleanor was waiting when I returned. You've been gone a while, she said, eyes curious. I found what I needed. She tilted her head. And what will you do now? I smiled faintly. Call an old friend. Ruth Parker had been my closest colleague at the school where I taught literature. She retired a few years before me and went to law school in her 60s for fun, as she put it. The last time we spoke, she was running a small elder rights nonprofit in the city. That night I borrowed the recreation room's phone after hours. It took 3 rings before I heard her warm, familiar voice. Margaret Hayes. You're alive. Where on earth have you been hiding? I laughed softly. In plain sight apparently. Ruth, I need your help. Within minutes she went from teasing to professional calm. I explained everything. The nursing home, Daniel's forgery, the financial control, the strange behavior of the administration. Send me what you have, she said. And don't let them know you've caught on. I'll start digging. Over the next few weeks, Ruth and I communicated through letters disguised as old friends exchanging memories. I'd slip my notes into envelopes labeled book club materials. She'd send back coded advice. Eleanor became my ally, keeping watch while I wrote. It felt good to be useful again. To fight, to plan. I could feel the teacher in me waking up. I began paying attention to which staff avoided eye contact, and which seemed nervous around management. One nurse, a young woman named Carla, often lingered near our table at lunch. She had kind eyes but her shoulders carried tension. One afternoon I caught her alone by the vending machines. You don't like how things are run here, do you? I asked. Her face went pale. Mrs. Hayes, I can't. I'm not asking you to risk your job. I said gently. Just tell me one thing. Are they hiding something? Carla hesitated, then nodded. More than you know. Residents' families think their accounts go toward care packages and outings. But most of that money never leaves the office. Where does it go? Bonuses, she whispered. For the director and his brother. They own the supply company that services this place. My heart pounded. Thank you, I said quietly. That's all I needed to know. That evening I added a new section to my notes labeled Corruption Trail. Ruth confirmed my suspicions in her next letter. Follow the invoices, she wrote. And keep the original forged document safe. We'll need it. Weeks passed. Winter thawed into spring. The home decorated the halls with paper tulips and hosted a family appreciation day. Daniel and Lydia attended. All smiles for the staff. Shaking hands like politicians. Emily clung to my arm, chattering about school projects and art class. I tried to focus on her laughter, not on Daniel's voice echoing behind me. Mom, he said quietly when Lydia wandered off. You look well. They're taking good care of you, right? I met his gaze steadily. Better care than you ever did. He flinched. Mom, please don't start. Why, Daniel? I asked softly. Was I too much trouble? Or was it easier to control me from a distance? His jaw tightened. You're imagining things. I smiled faintly. We'll see. Later that week, Ruth sent word through one of her interns. She was coming to town. I arranged to meet her at the garden courtyard where residents rarely went. When she arrived, I almost didn't recognize her. Shorter hair, sharper eyes, same unstoppable energy. Well, she said, lowering her sunglasses, you've gotten yourself into quite the mystery, haven't you? Daniel forged my signature, Ruth, I said. And he's using that to drain my account. She nodded grimly. He's in deeper trouble than he realizes. I checked public records. He's refinanced your house under a trust that lists him as executor. And guess what? The nursing home's corporate board includes a certain Mr. Daniel Hayes as an investor. I stared at her, speechless. He didn't just put you here to get rid of you, she continued. He's profiting from it. For a moment the world went silent except for the faint hum of bees around the flowers. Then something inside me shifted again, grief giving way to resolve. What do we do? I asked. We document everything, Ruth said. Then we make sure the right people see it. That night I looked at Eleanor sleeping peacefully and whispered, We're not powerless, you know. None of us is. The next morning I began asking quiet questions around the dining hall. Simple things at first. How long residents had been there, who handled their finances, and whether anyone had lost contact with family after moving in. Patterns emerged. Too many stories of missing funds and paperwork confusion. Carla helped when she could, leaving photocopies of invoices near my tray. Each one matched Ruth's findings. Fake billing, duplicate charges, phantom donations. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became. Ridgeview Haven was less a refuge, and more a business built on silence. A few nights later, Eleanor woke to find me sitting upright, reading by flashlight. You're going to bring this whole place down, aren't you? she said with a sleepy grin. I'm going to bring it into the light, I whispered. There's a difference. She chuckled softly. You've still got that fire, Margaret. Remind me never to get on your bad side. By the end of the month, Ruth had enough to move forward. She filed preliminary papers under the radar. Whistleblower protection. Elder exploitation investigation. The process would take time, but it was moving. Then one Friday afternoon, the calm shattered. Mr. Clayton stormed into my room unannounced. His face flushed. Mrs. Hayes, he barked. Did you remove confidential files from our records department? I looked him straight in the eye. Are you accusing me of theft? He slammed a folder onto the desk. We know you've been meddling. If you continue, we'll have to relocate you for your own safety. Eleanor sat up, startled. You can't just move her. Clayton ignored her. You'll be transferred tomorrow morning. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Then you'd better make it quick. Because by tomorrow afternoon there will be investigators here asking for you by name. He froze. What did you say? I said you should probably start packing, Mr. Clayton. The burden you created is about to land squarely on your shoulders. He stared at me, mouth opening, then turned on his heel and left. The door slammed behind him. Eleanor's eyes were wide. Margaret, what did you do? Nothing yet, I said calmly. But tomorrow everything changes. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the moon cast pale light across the snow-covered courtyard. Somewhere out there my son was sleeping soundly, certain his secret was safe. He had no idea that his mother, his so-called burden, had just become the storm heading his way. The next morning broke with the kind of silence that warned of something coming. I could feel it in my bones. The same instinct that once told me when a student was lying. The same quiet hum before a storm. Eleanor watched me pack my few belongings into a small bag. You're really going through with this? She asked. I don't start fights, I said softly. But I don't walk away from them either. By 9 o'clock the building buzzed with whispers. 2 cars had pulled into the parking lot. 1 black sedan. 1 white government-issued van. Men and women in crisp suits stepped out. Clipboards and cameras in hand. Ruth had kept her word. The inspection was real and thorough. Mr. Clayton's face turned the color of raw clay when the investigators walked into his office. I watched from the hallway as he fumbled through explanations. The staff hovered nearby, pretending to be busy. Carla caught my eye briefly, and gave the slightest nod. One of the investigators, a tall woman with steel-gray hair, approached me later. Mrs. Hayes, she asked, I understand you raised some concerns about financial misconduct. I met her gaze steadily. I didn't raise them, I proved them. She smiled faintly. We'll handle it from here. You've done more than enough. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. By afternoon, the facility was a flurry of confusion. Files were seized. Computers checked, and staff questioned. Residents whispered in corners, sensing something important was happening. When Clayton tried to leave, the officers stopped him at the door. Watching him pale as they escorted him away was the first breath of justice I'd had in months. That night Eleanor and I sat by the window sharing a quiet moment. You did it, she whispered. You really did it. I smiled, though it was a sad smile. It's a start, but Daniel still doesn't know what's coming. 2 days later Ruth called. Her voice carried both triumph and warning. Margaret, they've frozen the home's accounts. Multiple charges are under review, including your son's financial ties. But brace yourself, this will get messy. I've been living in a mess for a while, I said. I'll manage. Good, she said. Because I'm scheduling a meeting. You'll be there and so will Daniel. When I hung up, I stared out the window. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to scream. But most of me just wanted to look him in the eye and see if there was anything left of the boy I once loved. The meeting took place in a small conference room downtown. Ruth picked me up herself, her old blue sedan rumbling down the road like an aging warrior still ready for battle. You ready? She asked. I've been ready since the day he called me a burden. When we entered, Daniel was already there. Pressed suit, perfect tie, the same confidence he'd inherited from a world that had never told him no. His expression froze when he saw me. Mom, he said, rising. What's going on? Ruth set her briefcase on the table and looked directly at him. Mr. Hayes, we'll get to that. Please sit. He hesitated, then obeyed. The air was thick enough to cut. I didn't look away from him once. Ruth began calmly, her voice steady. Mrs. Hayes has come into possession of several documents, suggesting forgery and financial exploitation. As her legal counsel, I filed preliminary complaints with both the state board and the local authorities. Daniel blinked rapidly. This is ridiculous. My mother. She's confused. She doesn't understand how these things work. I leaned forward. Then explain it to me, Daniel. Explain why my signature appears on documents I never saw. Explain why my home is no longer in my name. Explain why your name shows up on corporate filings for the very company running Ridgeview Haven. For a moment he couldn't speak. His mouth opened then closed again. Finally he stammered. It's complicated. No, I said quietly. It's simple. You betrayed me. The room fell silent. Ruth watched him like a hawk. I didn't mean, he started. Didn't mean what? I snapped. Didn't mean to take my money. Didn't mean to hide me away like a piece of unwanted furniture. He rubbed his temples. You don't understand, Mom. Lydia and I, we were drowning in debt. The house was sitting empty and I was in the way. I finished for him. He winced. I thought I could fix it before you found out. I laughed softly, but it wasn't a kind laugh. You thought you could fix it by erasing me. You didn't just steal from me, Daniel. You stole from the woman who carried you, who gave up her life to give you yours. He looked down. For the first time I saw something break in his posture. Guilt, maybe, or just exhaustion from keeping his lies straight. Ruth spoke then, her tone sharp. Mr. Hayes, here's what's going to happen. You're going to return every cent you took. You'll relinquish all financial control, and you'll assist in the investigation into Ridgeview Haven's fraudulent operations. Do that and perhaps you'll avoid jail time. His head snapped up. Jail, oh yes, Ruth said coldly. Forgery, exploitation, misuse of power of attorney. Shall I go on? He swallowed hard. I stood slowly. And now I'm the consequence. You once told me I was a burden. You were wrong, Daniel. But then stopped I was your blessing. Door. Do you know what the cruelest part is? I would have forgiven you if you just asked for help. But you took my silence for weakness. That was your mistake. Ruth guided me outside as Daniel sat frozen in his chair, staring at the papers before him like they were ghosts. When we reached the parking lot, the air felt lighter. For the first time in months I could breathe. Ruth smiled gently. You handled that beautifully. I didn't want revenge. I said. Just truth. That's why it worked. She replied. A few weeks later, Ridgeview Haven shut its doors. The investigation revealed everything. Embezzlement, falsified medical charges, and illegal investments. The story made local news, and though I didn't care for attention, I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing justice had found its way. Daniel was charged with fraud and ordered to pay restitution. The court allowed me to regain control of my property, but I didn't return to my old house. It no longer felt like home. Instead, I used the money to buy a small cottage near the edge of town, a place surrounded by gardens and birdsong. Simple but mine. Eleanor moved in with me after her release from Ridgeview. We became each other's family. Two old women who refused to fade quietly. We planted roses out front and called them second chances. One afternoon as we sipped tea on the porch, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Daniel stepped out slowly, his shoulders hunched, eyes tired. He looked smaller somehow. Mom, he said softly. Can we talk? I gestured to the empty chair. Sit. He did, clasping his hands like a child in trouble. I came to say I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to hear it. I studied his face, the lines of regret, the years of arrogance finally stripped away. You hurt me, Daniel, I said quietly. You made me feel like I didn't matter. I know, he whispered. I was wrong. About everything. For a long moment we sat in silence, the wind rustling the rose bushes. Then I said, if you want to make things right, you'll help others like me. Start with the nursing homes that still need oversight. Use what you've learned. Do that and maybe one day I'll believe you've changed. He nodded, eyes wet. I will. When he left, Eleanor touched my arm. You're stronger than I'll ever be. I smiled faintly. Strength isn't what you use to fight. It's what you hold on to when everyone expects you to break. That night I sat by the window, looking out at the garden bathed in moonlight. I thought of Emily, the one innocent part of all this, and how one day she'd ask what happened. I'd tell her the truth, not out of bitterness, but as a lesson: never let anyone decide your worth for you. Because in the end I wasn't the burden. I was the reckoning. The days after Daniel's visit felt strangely quiet, like the world was holding its breath. For the first time in years, my mornings belonged entirely to me. No nurses with clipboards, no scheduled meals or mandatory activities. Just birdsong and sunlight streaming through lace curtains. Eleanor and I fell into a comfortable rhythm. We tended our little garden, read on the porch, and baked bread on Sundays. It wasn't the grand life people dream of, but it was honest, peaceful, and fully ours. Some evenings I'd catch myself staring at the roses we planted, each one a different shade, from deep crimson to pale cream. They reminded me that beauty doesn't vanish with age. It just takes root deeper, where time can't reach. Still, peace has a way of making you remember what hurt most. I often thought of Emily, her laughter, her little drawings, the way she used to braid my hair while telling stories about fairies and dragons. Weeks passed before I received a letter postmarked from out of state. The handwriting was careful, uncertain. My heart jumped when I recognized her name. Dear Grandma, Daddy told me what happened. He said he made big mistakes and that you were courageous. I saw you on the news. Mommy didn't want to talk about it, but I think you're amazing. I want to visit you one day and plant flowers together. Love, Emily. Tears blurred the ink before I reached the end. I pressed the letter to my chest, whispering, "One day, sweetheart. One day." Eleanor watched me quietly from her chair. Children have a way of finding their truth, she said softly, even when parents try to hide it. She was right. That night I sat at my desk and began writing again. Not notes or plans, but something gentler. A book of sorts. I titled it The Weight We Carry. It wasn't about revenge or justice, it was about resilience. About how love can survive betrayal and how age doesn't steal your power, it just changes its form. Ruth visited often, usually with pastries and new legal updates. The case stirred up quite a movement, she said one afternoon. A few local organizations are pushing for stricter regulations on elder care facilities. They want you to speak at their awareness event. I almost laughed. You want me to stand in front of a crowd and tell them I outsmarted my own son? Exactly, Ruth said with a grin. You'd be surprised how many people need to hear it. Eleanor clapped her hands. Do it, Margaret. Let them see what strength really looks like. So I did. The event was held at the town library, a place that had always felt like sacred ground to me. I stood behind the podium, hands trembling slightly, staring out at a sea of faces. Young, old, hopeful, weary. Cameras clicked softly in the background. I'm not here as a victim, I began. I'm here as proof that silence helps no one. We think love means tolerance, but sometimes love means standing up, even to the people who share your blood. The audience leaned forward, captivated. I spoke of Ridgeview Haven, of Daniel, of Eleanor, of the quiet war fought by those society forgets. And I ended with words I hadn't planned, but that came straight from the heart. Kindness isn't weakness, it's endurance. It's what keeps the world from breaking completely. When the applause came, it wasn't loud, it was long. People stood, some wiping tears. Ruth's eyes shone with pride. Afterward, a young woman approached me, holding her mother's hand. Mrs. Hayes, she said, voice trembling. Your story saved us. I was about to put my mom in a home, but now, I think we'll figure out a way to make it work. I hugged her. That's all I ever wanted. The story spread. Local journalists picked it up, then national ones. They called me the teacher who taught her son a lesson. Though that headline never sat right with me. It wasn't about teaching Daniel. It was about reminding people that dignity doesn't expire with age. A month later, a letter arrived from Daniel. No excuses, no justifications. Just a few simple lines. Mom, I'm volunteering now, at a senior center. Every day I think of how I failed you. I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying to help others so they never feel the way you did. Thank you for giving me a chance to change. Love, Daniel. I read it twice, then tucked it into The Weight We Carry, between chapters titled Forgiveness and Freedom. Eleanor teased me that evening. Are you going soft on him? I smiled. Forgiveness isn't softness. It's letting go of the chains we build around our anger. She chuckled. You should put that in your book. I already did. That summer Emily came to visit. When I saw her running up the garden path, all curls and sunshine, my heart nearly burst. She threw her arms around me, giggling. Grandma, Daddy said we can plant anything you want. Anything. I smiled. Then we'll plant lilacs. They smell like memories. We spent the day digging in the soil, laughter echoing between the trees. Daniel stayed on the porch, watching quietly. When our eyes met, I saw humility there. Not the polished confidence he used to wear like armor, but something gentler, real. Later, as the sky turned pink, he approached. "You've made this place beautiful," he said softly. "It's not the place," I replied. "It's the peace." He nodded, looking at the flowers. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said, "but forgiveness isn't earned, it's offered." He swallowed hard. "Thank you." When he and Emily left that evening, I stood by the gate watching their car disappear down the road. The ache in my chest wasn't pain anymore. It was something else. Something like closure. The next few months passed in calm rhythm. Ruth helped me self-publish The Weight We Carry, and it spread far beyond what either of us expected. Letters poured in from people around the world. Children apologizing to parents. Elders finding courage to speak up. Families reconnecting after years of silence. Each one reminded me that sometimes the smallest voices echo the loudest. Eleanor passed peacefully that autumn. I found her asleep in her chair, a half-finished scarf draped across her lap. She looked serene, like she'd simply drifted into another dream. We buried her beneath the lilac bush she loved most. I read a passage from my book at her service. We are never truly gone if our kindness has taken root in someone else. That night I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the wind carrying the scent of lilacs through the air. I whispered into the dark, "Rest well, my friend. We did what we came to do." The world had moved on, but I didn't feel left behind anymore. I'd found my place in it again. Not as a forgotten mother, but as a survivor, a teacher still shaping lives in ways I never expected. And every so often, when the mail arrives and I see a new letter addressed to Mrs. Margaret Hayes, I smile, knowing that somewhere out there, someone found strength in my story. Because pain, when shared, becomes purpose. And purpose, well, that's the real inheritance we leave behind. The winter that followed was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, but full of understanding. I woke each morning to the creak of old floorboards, the kettle's whistle, and the song of the sparrows that had made a home near my window. It was the first winter in years I didn't dread. Life had become simple, but there was beauty in that simplicity. I'd learned that peace isn't something you chase. It's something you build one small act of courage at a time. Some mornings I still caught myself reaching for the phone, thinking about calling Daniel just to check in. Then I'd remember how far we'd come. The anger, the heartbreak, and finally the fragile truce. I didn't want to disturb it with too many words. Sometimes silence says more than any conversation ever could. The days slipped by like soft pages turning. I spent most of them writing letters, not to anyone specific, but to the world itself. Letters about love, aging, forgiveness, and the invisible battles people fight when the world stops paying attention to them. I called the collection Letters from the Porch. Every afternoon I'd sit by the window, pen in hand, sunlight warming my shoulders, Eleanor's empty chair beside me. I could almost hear her teasing voice say, "Don't get sentimental, Margaret." I'd smile. Too late for that. One evening Ruth stopped by unexpectedly, carrying a folder and her usual bag of pastries. She set them on the table, her expression softer than usual. "You've become quite the celebrity, you know. I can't keep up with all your interview requests." I rolled my eyes. "I didn't tell this story for fame, Ruth. I told them so people wouldn't forget their humanity." "And they haven't," she said. "You've inspired an entire advocacy group. Seniors, caregivers, volunteers. They're naming it the Hayes Foundation." I blinked. "After me?" "After your courage," she corrected. "They want you to be their honorary chair." I laughed softly, half in disbelief. From a nursing home to a foundation, life's got quite the sense of humor. Ruth smiled. "You earned it." That night, I sat on the porch under a blanket. Stars scattered across the sky like silver dust. I thought about all the people who had written to me. Those finding strength. Those mending relationships. Those standing up for the first time. Maybe this was what purpose looked like after pain. Quiet ripples that reach farther than you ever expect. A few weeks later, I received a small package in the mail. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside was a framed photo of Emily holding a sign that read, "For Grandma, who taught me what strength means." My breath caught as I noticed Daniel standing behind her, his arm resting gently on her shoulder, both smiling in front of what looked like a senior center. There was a note. "Mom, I thought you'd want to see where your story started. The center's first outreach program launched today. Emily named it the Kindness Project. I know I can't undo the past, but I hope this helps heal some of it. Love always, Daniel." For a long moment, I just stared at that picture, tears welling without warning. It wasn't the kind of crying that came from pain. It was the kind that comes from release, from knowing something broken had finally begun to mend. That evening I placed the photo beside Eleanor's scarf on the mantel. "Looks like he's trying, old friend," I whispered. "Maybe we both got our miracles." Spring arrived with warmth that felt like forgiveness itself. The garden bloomed wild and bright, the lilacs perfuming every breeze. Birds nested in the eaves, and the sound of laughter returned to the yard. Emily's laughter, bright as ever. She came often that season, her hands always covered in dirt from planting. "Grandma," she said one day, "Daddy told me you taught people to be brave. Can you teach me too?" I smiled. "Bravery isn't about being fearless, darling. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared." She nodded solemnly, then giggled. "Then you must be the bravest person in the world." "Not the world," I said softly, "just mine." Later, after she and Daniel left, I sat by the roses again. The wind whispered through them like an old song, and I thought about all the lives intertwined with mine. Students long grown, friends gone, mistakes forgiven, love rediscovered. We spend so much of life trying to hold on to youth, to family, to control, when the real strength is learning when to let go. That night I dreamed of Ridgeview Haven, but it wasn't the same bleak place I remembered. The halls were full of light, laughter, and music. I saw Eleanor reading to a circle of residents, her scarf wrapped around her shoulders, her smile soft and sure. I woke with tears on my cheeks but peace in my heart. The next day Ruth visited again, this time with an envelope in hand. "Your book's being translated into 4 languages, she said proudly. "You're officially international." I laughed. "So the world gets to know about the old lady who outsmarted her son." "No," Ruth said gently. "They'll know about the woman who proved that dignity doesn't have an expiration date." We sat on the porch together, sipping tea as the sun dipped low. "You know," I said, "when Daniel first put me in that home, I thought my life was over. But it turns out he didn't bury me. He planted me." Ruth raised her cup. "To grow. To second chances," I added. We clinked our cups, laughing quietly as the first fireflies of summer began to glow in the garden. The years that followed moved softly but meaningfully. Emily grew taller, more confident. Daniel stayed true to his promise, dedicating his time to advocacy and reform. The Hayes Foundation expanded, sponsoring projects that gave seniors new voices. Each one felt like a small redemption, a thread stitching together the fabric of a broken family. I knew my time in this world would not last forever, but for once that didn't scare me. When you've made peace with your story, the ending doesn't feel like a door closing. It feels like a book being gently placed on a shelf, complete. One evening as I finished writing the final letter for Letters from the Porch, I signed my name carefully and smiled. The last words I wrote were these: "If you ever feel forgotten, remember that you're someone's beginning, not their ending." I placed the pen down, folded the page, and looked out at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the world in shades of gold and lavender. I could hear children laughing somewhere beyond the trees, and for a moment everything felt infinite. That was enough. There comes a point in every story where words begin to fade, and silence takes over. Not an empty silence, but one filled with meaning. Years passed like turning pages. Seasons bloomed and fell outside my little cottage, each one leaving a lesson behind. The roses that once marked my new beginning had grown tall and wild, leaning toward the porch as if listening for the next chapter. I'd grown older, slower maybe, but not smaller. My spirit felt lighter than it had in decades. Peace does that, it strips away the noise until all that's left is truth. Every morning I'd rise before sunrise, make my tea and sit by the window watching the light spill across the garden. Sometimes Daniel called. Sometimes he came with Emily, now a teenager with her father's eyes but my stubborn heart. "Grandma," she said once, "I read your book for my literature class." The teacher cried. I chuckled. That's because she's a teacher. They always understand what it means to keep believing in people. Daniel would smile at that. Quieter these days. Humbler. He'd help around the house without asking. Fixing small things. The loose step on the porch. The leaky faucet. It was as if every nail he hammered was another apology. Another act of rebuilding. One afternoon he found me sorting through old letters. "Mom," he asked softly, "do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said finally. "Because if they had, you wouldn't be who you are now. And I wouldn't have learned that forgiveness isn't a gift you give once. It's something you keep choosing." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I'm still learning." "So am I," I smiled. "That's how you know you're alive." That night after they left, I sat outside under the stars. The world was quiet except for the chirping of crickets and the faint rustling of the wind through the lilacs. I thought of everyone who had walked this path with me. Eleanor, Ruth, the nurses who finally spoke up. The countless strangers who'd found courage because of a story that began with pain and ended with purpose. I whispered into the night, "We made it." The following spring, the Hayes Foundation organized its largest event yet, a national symposium on elder dignity and reform. They invited me as the keynote speaker. I hesitated at first. I wasn't sure I had anything left to say. But Ruth insisted. "You started this movement," she said. "You should see how far it's come." So I went. The auditorium was vast, filled with faces from every generation. Reporters lined the aisles. Students scribbled notes, and caregivers held hands with those they cared for. When I stepped onto that stage, a hush fell over the room. I took a deep breath and began. People ask me if I'm angry about what happened. The truth is I was. For a long time. But anger is like a fire. It'll warm you for a moment, then burn everything you love if you feed it too long. What saved me wasn't revenge. It was empathy. The room stayed silent except for the soft clicking of cameras. I forgave my son not because he deserved it, but because I refused to let pain define me. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about reclaiming your peace. I glanced toward the front row, where Daniel and Emily sat together. He gave me a small grateful nod. And to everyone here, I continued, "Please remember this. Aging isn't the end of the story. It's the chapter where you finally understand what all the others meant." When I finished, the audience stood. The applause was thunderous, but what moved me most were the tears. The shared understanding that we all carry burdens. And sometimes those burdens become bridges. Afterward, a young reporter approached. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, "if you could tell the world one last thing, what would it be?" I smiled. That kindness will always outlive cruelty. Every time, that night Daniel drove me home. The road was quiet, the sky painted with streaks of violet and gold. Emily dozed in the back seat, her head resting on her backpack. "Mom," Daniel said softly, eyes still on the road, "I think about the day I left you at Ridgeview every morning. I used to hate that memory. Now it reminds me how easily love can get lost when pride takes over." I reached over and placed my hand on his. "You found your way back. That's what matters." He exhaled, a long shaky breath. "I don't deserve you." I smiled gently. "You don't have to deserve love, Daniel. You just have to learn how to keep it." When we reached the cottage, he helped me inside and made tea, just the way I liked it, with honey and a slice of lemon. As I watched him moving around the kitchen, I realized something. The same hands that once signed away my freedom were now pouring me peace, one cup at a time. Later, after they left, I walked into the garden one last time that night. The air was cool, the roses swaying softly. I felt the years settle around me like a shawl. Warm, gentle, familiar. I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for myself, but for every soul who'd ever been made to feel like a burden. May you find your strength. May you remember that love, even when broken, can bloom again. I went inside, wrote one final note in letters from the porch, and placed it atop the stack. Life will hand you storms, but it also shelters you in unexpected places. Be brave enough to rebuild when everything falls apart. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the window, bright and golden. I brewed my tea, sat on the porch, and smiled as the first birds began to sing. The world kept moving, and so did I. Just slower, softer, but still forward. Before you go, I just want to say thank you for staying with me through my story. If it touched your heart, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about kindness, courage, and redemption. And if you can, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It warms my heart to know that across all those miles, for a few minutes, we shared the same story. Because in the end, that's what stories are for. To remind us that no matter how far apart we are, we're never really alone.